for those of us who haven't been to Minnesota since the ICE and Border Patrol and others kind of came in en masse, just to try to give a sense of what it's like to walk the streets of the city, what it's like to live day to day in a city that's under this kind of federal assault.
So I'm not a native Minnesotan. I moved here 8 years ago, which in Minnesota time is really recent.
Uh,
And I've fallen tremendously in love with. It's a very small metropolitan area. Our neighborhoods, every neighborhood has a commercial heart, and so every neighborhood feels walkable. And there's a real feeling of, I think, because it's winter, 9 months a year, of like we pay attention to one another, and like getting to see each other is very precious, right? Because our streets are cold and and they're icy, literally icy all winter long. And so we want to like pay attention to one another. And I think that the experience in this small metropolitan area since the beginning of this surge, I want to say that before the surge, we had 165 ICE agents in the metro area. Since the surge, we now have something like 3,000 ICE agents, which overwhelms our police force and means that they're able to be in so many places at once. The experience being a neighbor, being a resident of the Twin Cities now is that if I want to drive from the grocery store to my home, it is likely I might witness an abduction. If I want to drive from my child's school to my synagogue, it is likely that I will be driving by vehicles that are carrying people with their buffs pulled up. So that's masks up to their eyes, covering their faces with out of town license plates. And it also means that I might, when I'm driving to visit, to sit down with Muslim colleagues at a local cafe, I might pass by an entire neighborhood where every single street corner has a neighbor with a whistle around their neck, waiting because there's been such an escalation in the neighborhood that there are just people who are vigilant and stationed, ready to sound the alarm, if and as ICE shows. And indeed, this is a story. This story of going to sit with my colleagues at a cafe. As we were sitting there, lo and behold, we could hear the horns and the whistles. There was ICE right outside of our cafe.
Um, and what has and can you talk about a lot of people have marveled at the kind of at the across the country at the kind of the level of organization that has responded to this. Can you just talk about what is actually happening and how these networks have been created to respond to all this?
Yes, I mean, it's been an incredible grassroots effort. I think those who are at tables trying to prepare could not have imagined the micro focus. There are rapid response signal groups for each neighborhood, and even within neighborhoods for very hot corners, there will be rapid response networks that exist just to protect specific corridors. Like, people have been so rigorous and generous and relentless in the ways that we've found to show up for one another. And it's been so heartening. It means that, and what I would say is, like, I mentioned scenario planning before, but what I've learned from this time is that actually what has enabled us to sustain in these incredibly difficult weeks is not the strategy that existed before, but the relationship tending that is helping us stay upright and leaning on one another. It's the ways in which really the bonds of trust that get established, that were present, but have been reaffirmed by the ways that we show up at each other's doorsteps. If ICE is knocking on the door, on the street corners, if ICE has pulled over a car, in front of schools because ICE is targeting parents to drop off and pick up. Like, it's that feeling of we are starting to know each other in a really different way and count on one another in a really different way that has enabled this very grassroots response to sustain and also to evolve, because ICE's tactics have shifted a lot in these last weeks. And so too has this communal response of how it is that we continue to protect each other's humanity and basic safety.
Can you talk a little bit about that, about how ISIS tactics have changed and then how people have changed in their counter response?
Yeah, so I mean, my background is before rabbinical school, I worked with undocumented workers reclaiming unpaid wages from their employers, and we had in the olden days, right, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we had a really clear sense of how it was that ICE operated. ICE couldn't detain you if they didn't have a warrant. You could ask things like, am I free to go? If you didn't disclose where you were from, they didn't have the right to suspect that you were undocumented because of the color of your skin or because of the language that you spoke. But we see here in the Twin Cities now all of those really basic practices, like the rules of the game, which again, it was a broken game even then, but the basic rules of the game that we understood and could then orient around how to navigate taking doing direct action, showing up on the streets, navigating the days in workplaces, all of those rules have disappeared. And so formerly there were protections around synagogues and churches and mosques, around houses of worship, around hospitals and around schools, that ICE would not go to those very foundational centers of social life. But that is now suspended. ICE enters our hospitals. ICE is harassing our schools and abducting cleaning staff and teachers and parents. And ICE is also threatening our houses of worship. And so just in terms of how it is, and they even have now said that they can arrest someone if they suspect that that person might try to evade arrest, which is a new practice, right? That was an idea that someone would leave the state or leave the country to avoid their court date, but they're now applying that as though if they're afraid someone will get away from being stopped, that could be a citizen, right? That could be a Native or Indigenous person, that is reason enough for them to be able to arrest those individuals. And we're seeing that happen. Abductions are now happening, but like they can take 30 seconds to a minute for ICE to stop someone, smash their window, and take someone out of their car. And this is where I'm just like, it's almost like processing in real time what it is that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, because ICE is also shifting their tactics about how they're intimidating and harassing observers. So both their tactics around how it is that they are targeting and abducting our neighbors, citizen and non-citizen alike, is also shifting around the ways that they're trying to tamp down folks' response and ability to show up for one another. And so ICE is taking pictures of rapid responders' faces and their license plates. ICE is showing up in front of observers' houses and just idling there for hours. ICE has smashed windows of observers and dragged people out of their cars and assaulted them. ICE has drawn people who are following because into alleyways, and then say they get out of their cars and say to observers, like, this is your warning next time you're getting arrested. And we've seen in the case of our neighbors Renee Good and Alex Preddy that ICE has murdered observers for showing up for their neighbors. And so this is the tactics are shifting all the time. And I am very proud to be an adopted Minnesotan because the people continue to show up. And we saw after the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy that more people showed up to get trained. More people showed up to say, I want to be for my neighbors the way these people have been.
And can you talk a little more about what it is about Minnesota in particular? You talked initially about the weather and the way in which the cold has an impact, but what else it is about Minnesota, the legacy of George Floyd, or just the nature of the culture and politics that has allowed this really extraordinary community response?
I love that question. And I think we're still learning about it. I think we are surprised ourselves. We are surprised ourselves by the ways that we're responding. And I think that there's a lot of love on the streets of Minnesota. And there's some people in this room who were there just a few weeks ago as part of the clergy convening. And like, there's a real love for the way that our community has held together, because Minnesota or Minneapolis has a deep history of redlining, which means that historically there's been and it continues to be like a deep legacy of segregation and siloing between communities. This community is also very wise in resistance and wise to how it is that we show up to keep each other safe following state violence. Minneapolis had to respond after the murder of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile and George Floyd and Renee Good and Alex Preddy, where George Floyd and Renee Good and Alex Preddy were murdered, are all within a mile and a half of each other. And so this is a community really geographically bound that knows in our bodies what it feels like when we lose a neighbor and how it is we need to show up. And so I would say that there's a mutual aid infrastructure that was certainly strengthened in 2020 in the context of the uprising. But the scale of response and the way that it cuts across class and generation and race and language is something that I would say we've not seen, and it's something that has given average rabbis like a great deal of hope and a great deal of momentum in this time.